Okay, it looks like we've stabilized as far as our joining. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Today, we will be reviewing a Planberry 2050 engagement with a focus on the final round, which took place this spring and summer of this year. My name is Ursula Vogler. I'm one of the project managers of Planberry 2050 Public Engagement. I'm joined by Dave Vaughton, who is the project manager of Planberry 2050, Chirag Rabari, who is the manager of the implementation plan for Planberry 2050, Adam Knowlting, who manages the EIR process for Planberry 2050, Leslie, who is my co-project manager for engagement, Jules Teglovic, who was key in writing the draft plan and supplemental reports and did a lot of editing. And then finally, Marty Pascal, she manages our tribal engagement for the plan, and Matt Maloney, who's our planning director. Next slide. So today we welcome to our engagement webinar for Planberry 2050. We're going to go over the Planberry 2050 engagement process with a special focus on our last round this spring and summer, but we're also going to review the entire engagement process for Planberry. We're going to go over and have questions and answers with staff, and that you can enter in any questions at any time into the Q&A box. Or at the appropriate time, use the raise hand feature and we'll call on you. Then we're going to go into what we heard for this last round before another question and answer period. And then we'll go over the next steps. Next slide. So for those of you who've been with us a while, you've seen this graphic probably more than a few times. So I just wanted to point out our engagement process in relation to Planberry 2050. So for Horizon, we had 2 rounds of engagement that set the stage. We held our first set of pop-ups in early 2018, where we asked the public, what did they like about the Bay Area and what did they want to change? This input laid the groundwork for the guiding principles for the entire plan. The second round of engagement for Horizon focused on discussion with the public about the initial strategies, which helped create the blueprint for the plan. Both rounds were instrumental in creating both the guiding principles and the strategies of Planberry 2050. As we moved into the plan engagement, and you'll see those with the red stars and the numbers, per SB 375 statute, we have 3 rounds of engagement for the plan. The first introduced the plan to the public in late 2019 and asked the public to prioritize and refine the Horizon strategies for inclusion in the plan's blueprint. The second round in mid-2020 was our heaviest round, where we asked the public about the specifics of the blueprint, including input on specific plan strategies to help us refine them for the draft plan. And finally, our last round included input on the implementation plan in late 2020, early 2021, and then input on the draft plan, the draft implementation plan, and the draft environmental impact report in late spring, early summer of this year. All gearing up for adoption in a few months. Next slide. So first, we'd like to review this latest round of engagement. Next slide. This final round of engagement capped a very intensive public and partner engagement effort. We approached this plan differently than the others. We wanted to build the plan from the ground up, rather than using more traditional approaches that didn't allow for as much creativity to solve the region's problems. One of these approaches was to use public's and partners' input as a starting point, rather than as a reaction to planning or modeling efforts. We tried to create a more collaborative environment with our partners and the public. This really made a big difference for us in public engagement. The commitment was there from the beginning from staff. Next slide. So to review, this final round focused on the release of our key documents, the draft plan, its supplemental reports, and the draft implementation plan, which were released in late May. The draft EIR was released in early June. We have formal comment periods that are dictated by state law and our public participation plan, and public comment periods for all documents closed on July 20th. Next slide. Given that we were still under COVID restrictions, all of the engagement outlined here was done virtually. For our workshops, we chose to divide them up by geographic area rather than by county, and we held 4, one for the North Bay counties, one for the South Bay, East Bay, and West Bay counties. We also prioritized our partners by holding 2 technical workshops, one on the draft plan and one on the draft implementation plan during this time. We held our mandated public hearings virtually as well. We wanted to include youth and held a workshop and a video challenge. More on that later too. Finally, we used digital promotion to increase our reach on the plan by promoting a video and our workshops. This worked very well to get more comments on the plan. People could directly comment within the plan document and on our Plan Bay Area website. Next slide. So first, we'd like to dig into our digital engagement numbers. For our summer engagement, our digital promotion made a huge difference. So you can see here that there were over 3 million number of times that a post showed up on social media feed. And we promoted our engagement via Facebook, Instagram stories, and YouTube. 40% of those watched the video when the ad was served, which is very high for us, also on those 3 platforms. We had over 5,000 downloads of the draft plan, the draft EIR, and the supplemental reports and related materials. And then we had over 800,000 views of our video and of our promotion. So I'll go into the importance of digital promotion in a few slides, but I wanted to point out that in addition to the 40% view rate, 30% completed the video on Facebook and YouTube, which is a phenomenal rate. To put these stats in perspective, during our last plan, we sent out an online survey to our database and also asked our partners to send out the request on our behalf. We received fewer than 1,000 completes at that time, but for our latest survey, we received over 4,000 completes, which is an over 4-fold increase. Next slide. We also used traditional engagement to reach those without internet. For this plan, we used targeted mailing to residents who live in equity priority communities throughout the region. And we sent them to over 20,000 mailing addresses and over 10,000 email addresses we sent from our database and other sources to for Plan Bay Area 2050 and the EIR. Next slide. So before we move on to what we heard, I'd like to provide an overview of the entire Plan Bay Area engagement process. Next slide. This is MTC and ABAG's 3rd iteration of Plan Bay Area. As many of you know, this plan was a lot different than our other efforts. Starting with the Horizon Initiative, we wanted to deconstruct traditional planning. We knew that traditional engagement would not get us the input we needed. A few people at an in-person meeting throughout the process just wouldn't cut it. So of course, this was 2018 and pre-COVID, so we were still able to conduct in-person engagement. We started the process by talking with our Metropolitan Planning Organization partners, and they suggested we go where the people were. So we began by coordinating pop-up workshops, and they worked out great for us. We went to farmers markets, libraries, schools, local events, and talked to people as they were milling about. Over the course of Horizon and the plan, we conducted 65 pop-ups and reached approximately 2,000 people and received over 5,000 comments, something we would have never come close to with traditional meetings. We also continued conducting our community focus groups, which have been a mainstay for us. We held 18 community focus groups with adults and children during the Plan Bay Area 2050 process, and we learned a lot of valuable insight and received detailed input that we couldn't get from our online surveys and webinars. Another very important element, which became even more important with COVID restrictions, was the ability to conduct digital engagement. We started doing online webinars before the start of the plan in summer 2019. We found we had a lot of success using Zoom to conduct our webinars, attracting people who wouldn't have had time to travel to MTC San Francisco offices, for example. We also created online surveys and our Mayor of Bayville game, which allowed us to get a lot of detailed input. Finally, and maybe most importantly, we use paid digital promotion for our efforts, as I mentioned earlier. I'm not sure I can state this enough. Without digital promotion, we would not have been able to receive the number of comments we did. We were able to target our audience to get the greatest response. And in so doing, we were able to skew younger and were able to reach more women. We were able to reach those who speak Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese like never before. So for those of you in public engagement, if you're interested, we are happy to talk with you about using digital promotion for your engagement efforts. Next slide. So I wanted to review with you the breakdowns of participation by round. So this first round, again, was in 2019, and we held 37 in-person pop-up workshops. 78% of them were held in or near equity priority communities. This had approximately 1,000 participants and yielded over 3,000 comments. We also, as I mentioned, conducted our Mayor of Bayville game with that had 3,000 participants. It had almost 10,000 comments. We held our tribal summit as we always do, and we had 23 events of a regional advisory working group and regional equity working group with our partners and stakeholders. Next slide. So for the second round, we had a community-based discussion groups, small group discussions with members of our community-based organizations that we partner with. We had 7 of these. We had over 60 participants with 260 comments. We held 9 digital workshops, 1 per county, and we had over almost 300 participants for those. We conducted an online survey to request input on the plan's draft blueprint. We had over 3,900 completes with over 16,000 comments. Our statistically valid poll that we conduct for each Plan Bay area cycle, we had nearly 3,000 completes and almost 150,000 comments from that poll. We also held telephone town halls. This was the first time we tried that. This was primarily targeted to people without internet, and it was a phone-based system where people could engage on the plan. We had sparse attendance for this, but we hope to improve that for next time because we think it's a key thing to do to reach people who don't have internet. And we continued with our tribal summit and our stakeholder engagement. Next slide. So for this final round, which, oh yeah, thank you. Back one, thank you. For this final round, it stretched from late 2020 to this summer. We held discussion groups with small group discussions with residents and students. We had 11 of those. We had an online survey and also a text-based survey for those who don't have internet. They could use their phone to respond to the survey. We had over 2,000 participants and over 15,000 comments. We held our public hearings, our workshops, and we had a tribal summit and a government-to-government consultation with one of the tribes. We also had youth engagement, and Leslie will go over that next or later. And we held a workshop and also had a video challenge. And then finally, we continued with our stakeholder engagement. We really ramped it up this time. We held over 90 events and we had over 1,000 participants. So all of this engagement really helped us shape the plan. And it was really key for us and I think groundbreaking for MTC and ABAG during this plan cycle. Next slide. So now I'd like to open it up to questions. And you can type the questions into your Q&A box. And I have a first question here from Lucas. Lucas asks, can you provide more information about the 150,000 comments received from the telephone poll? That's an order of magnitude more than the number of comments received in my other events. Yes, Lucas, we can. So, and Leslie, my colleague, is joining me. We counted every response from the poll as a comment. So sometimes we would ask, which of these do you feel is important, X, Y, and Z? And we would count every response as an answer. So we consider every response, even all of the above. If you're saying all of the above, that means that you support all of the answers, and each one of those is a comment. So that's why it seems like there are so many comments in this. And also the number of questions was much larger than our online survey. So hopefully that answers your question. So Bruce asks, what is a priority equity community? And I see Dave is getting online, so Dave can answer. Dave.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Our equity priority community is a census tract that has a disproportionately high share of either minority residents or low income residents. So it's basically an area of concentrated communities of color or low income communities. There's a variety of other factors that exist as part of the formula, but those are two of the key drivers in terms of identifying the equity priority communities. And these are key places in terms of where we'd like to hear voices who may have been underrepresented in past planning processes, as well as places that we want to make sure we're investing in infrastructure and our other public policies to advance equity.
Thanks, Dave. Susan asks, please describe your engagement with elected officials, like city council members or leaders of neighborhood and homeowners associations. So Susan, we, and Dave can even speak to this too, we, in our elected officials, our commissioners and executive board members, we definitely have gone every planning committee meeting, virtually every planning committee meeting throughout this almost 4-year process have we engaged with our elected officials. We have a special meetings with ABAG when we have general assemblies, and we also talk about the plan. We've done that. I know the planning department also has any meeting that's requested of them with the elected officials. And finally, and we didn't put this in to our slide, but we are mandated to present Plan Bay Area to bodies, city councils and supervisors of different counties to present the sustainable community strategy. And Dave and Matt have done this. We have done 8 of them, and we will complete our 9-county process with San Francisco next month. So I feel we have a robust engagement with elected officials. Dave, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add.
Great, okay, thank you. So the next question is from Jeff. Has the long-range population forecast been re-examined in light of most recent census showing population decline with lower birth rates and more rapid out-migration?
So I'm happy to take this question, although it's not really related to today's webinar. So one of the aspects of developing our plan is developing the regional growth forecast. And we conducted that work both before COVID hit and during COVID. So we were able to incorporate some of the impacts associated with the COVID-19 pandemic and the recession into the regional growth forecast. That work occurred throughout 2020 and was integrated into the final blueprint, which is now the draft plan. Now, obviously, that analysis is based on the best available information at the time, and we have continued information that comes forward, including the recent release of census data. Unfortunately, we can't update the regional growth forecast based on new data here in 2021. Under our settlement agreement with the Building Industry Association, we must finalize the regional growth forecast before proceeding into the EIR process, which we are currently in. Now, it's important to remember we update these plans every 4 years. And one of the key points that we'll be looking at as we go into the next iteration of Plan Bay Area will be further updates to the regional growth forecast. But I would urge folks to remember that 1 year of data is not necessarily a trend. In fact, we see right now that rental applications in San Francisco have continued to grow here in 2021, indicating that maybe those declines that we saw in 2020 may not be sustained. So it's something we're going to look closely at as we develop the next regional growth forecast for the future update of Plan Bay Area.
Dave, thank you. Very good. So we did talk about equity priority communities, but here's what tool defines it. I don't know if that's a quick answer, Dave.
So the equity priority communities are based on American Community Survey data, so census data. We updated the equity priority communities based on the latest American Community Survey data last year as part of the Plan Bay Area 2050 process. And you can find a map of the equity priority communities for Plan Bay Area 2050 on our website. So check that out. You can see the equity priority communities page and link to an interactive map that shows you where these communities are. It also will describe the 8 factors that identify an equity priority community. But again, the 2 key factors are really the share of residents in terms of low income status and the share of residents who are persons of color.
Dave, thanks. Next question from Keen. Question from outside San Francisco. How did you link public input from the initial engagements to what is identified in the most recent draft? For example, any ideas submitted by the public, did you connect them to the actions identified in the latest draft?
So I'm happy to take this question because we've conducted, a half dozen rounds of engagement for this planning process, and every single round feeds into the next. So when we conducted the Horizon Initiative, we were really looking at strategies and refining those strategies based on public feedback and how they held up against the different futures. And then they fed into the draft blueprint, and then they fed into the final blueprint. And so there are fingerprints of work from the public and from stakeholders that have made its way through the 3.5-year process so far. So for example, one of the strategies that we looked at early on was all lane tolling, but that strategy has been shaped and informed by engagement during the futures planning process, where we identified equity issues and the need to address those and mitigate them through modifications to the strategy. We heard feedback in the draft blueprint engagement stage in summer of 2020 that influenced the economic strategies in the economy element of what you see today. So it's not just the feedback from the latest round that's going to inform the final plan, but really feedback from years of engagement over time.
Thanks, Dave. Next question for Leslie. You said you were able to engage many more Mandarin speakers and women as a result of digital advertising. Was there some specific campaigns or just by way of using digital advertising?
So it was by way of using digital advertising. We had a consultant who's very knowledgeable with the social media algorithms. So we were very successful at targeting our just our general campaigns and then targeting them to a specific audience. So for this latest round, we did conduct, we translated all of our materials into Spanish and Chinese, and then we did 3 specific targeted campaigns to Spanish speakers, Mandarin speakers, and Cantonese speakers throughout the Bay Area. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, Ursula.
No, I think that's absolutely true. We have tried several different ways in addition to digital advertising, but that was by far our most successful. Okay, next question. Did you get many comments and questions about the water supply needed to sustain the population growth projected in Plan Bay Area? With the current drought, I'm guessing this is on many people's minds.
So I'm going to suggest that we take that question once we've covered the second half of today's presentation, which is about the feedback we received on the latest round of engagement.
Good point, Dave. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hold these questions until we get to that second part, which we're going to engage in right after this. So, okay, next question then. What did you find to be the most successful ways to reach older adults and elders to learn about their housing needs? So I'm going to say that the best way we engaged the older population would be when we had our pop-up events. We would go to various locations where all ages were. Farmers markets, I would think of especially. We did go to schools, but schools are usually younger people. And so we talked to all different people, and I would say that in farmers markets, the ages skewed usually older. And so we definitely targeted or were able to engage with people who are older. And I'm not sure what the age ranges you're considering, but I would say maybe 55, 60 plus, definitely those. Leslie, anything I'm forgetting?
No, I did want to add about our digital engagement, though, that our organic digital engagement always skewed older, 65 and older. So it's very refreshing to see that older people were very active on social media. And then we also had our general campaigns that were targeted to the general public. They also tended to skew older when we didn't target to specific audiences.
Yes, we try also, we have to work to get younger people participating. Our plan engagement usually skews very much older. So yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to save this. Let's see. Okay, so here's another question related to engagement. Do you plan for any direct outreach conversations with the authors, comments, letters that you view as significant as you work to craft replies toward preparing a final EIR? We definitely are responding. All of the responses for the EIR, they come in the final EIR as per CEQA guidelines. And I would say, I don't know if Dave, you want to say anything about any direct responses, but through the EIR, we do submit all of the comments and the responses are in the actual EIR document. And as we mentioned earlier, in a few months, we will, those documents will be available and we are seeking approval of the plan at that time. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Leslie, who's going to go over what we heard.
Thanks, Ursula. If we could go to the next slide. Great, thank you. So we'll now review the correspondence and input that we received on the draft plan, the draft implementation plan, which is part of the draft plan, and the draft EIR during our most recent public comment period, which closed on Tuesday, July 20th. For this latest round, we received over 300 separate pieces of correspondence. And this all came in the form this came from the public, from our partners, advocate organizations, local jurisdictions, basically everyone throughout the Bay Area participated. And staff is reviewing and continues to review all of the correspondence, and each piece of correspondence is responded to. Some of the correspondence will result in changes to the draft plan. And as I said, we are in the process of responding to all the comments and aim to finish responding by the end of the month. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go back, Jules? I think I was on the wrong slide when. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, sorry. These are the themes, the top themes that we heard. And I'm going to start with the draft plan. Our engagement staff reviewed and categorized each piece of correspondence and tagged them with individual themes. We reviewed all of the themes, and the top 5 themes that emerged from the comments on the draft plan included strong support for the plan in general and the 35 strategies. Of course, with numerous requests from our partners and individuals for changes, additions, modifications to the plan, and clarifications. There was a lot of support and opposition for housing growth, and it was evenly split. And then there was a strong support for workforce development and training. That was also one of the top themes that emerged. There was a call for support for more active transportation and express lanes, and clear opposition to highway and freeway expansion. And the last theme to emerge as a top theme was concern over environmental hazards, specifically sea level rise and wildfire preparedness. Next slide. Okay, so from here, I'm going to review the top themes by each of the 4 plan elements. And I'm going to start with housing here. Please note that you can see all of the pieces of correspondence, and I believe there was a question asked earlier about where the correspondence is posted. Everything is posted to our Plan Bay Area website now, and the link is available in the chat. So on housing, there was an overall support for building more housing in general, and more affordable housing specifically. And there was a handful of folks who opposed any new housing growth. A second theme that emerged were several questions from partners on how to meet the regional housing needs allocation numbers, including how to address environmental and infrastructure impacts from that growth. There was continued concern over the jobs housing imbalance during the last round last summer. That was one of the challenges that emerged. And so there still continues to be worry about how that's going to be addressed. And then there's also support for diversity in housing types, but there was also some interest in maintaining single family housing zoning. Next slide, please. On the economy front, we heard strong support for workforce development, specifically support for training the workforce and prioritizing local labor from equity priority communities. There was support and opposition for universal basic income, which is one of our strategies, and that was evenly split. And then there was support for priority production areas, expanded internet access, and also support for better access to jobs. And on the economy front, this is the plan element that received the least comments. Next slide. Transportation is still the plan element that received the most comments. We heard that there is strong support for active transportation, included interest in expanded infrastructure for bike and ped improvements, including more trails. There was support for express lanes, but opposition to highway and freeway expansion, as I mentioned earlier. There is strong support for public transit, including support of more service and expansion of transit lines, specifically SMART. We heard support for enhanced safety for all users of active transportation and public transit. And then there was also interested in climate mitigation efforts related to transportation, like electrification and transportation demand management initiatives. Next slide. On the environment element, the environment and housing received about the same amount of comments. On the environment, there was a lot of interest in addressing environmental hazards, including sea level rise and wildfire. And then a second top concern on the environment front was a concern about the Bay Area's water supply, which somebody asked earlier. There's interest in greater focus on climate mitigation, and there's support for adding e-bikes to the environmental strategies, as well as for more regional trails. Next slide. So here are some of the actual quotes from the correspondence we received. People were interested in all aspects of the plan and commented accordingly. For example, one of the things, these comments illustrate some of the top things we heard: take a more comprehensive approach to wildfire resilience. I'm a former resident who was priced out of the area. I want improved housing options now. For freeway capacity improvements, including interchange improvements, I recognize that some older facilities may require improvements for safety. I strongly encourage reviewing them through the lens of climate and induced demand, and then prioritize local labor from underserved communities. So as you see, housing unaffordability, wildfire concerns, transportation issues, and comments on and workforce development and training are some of the comments that are reflected here. Next slide. So another document that we received many comments on was the draft implementation plan, which is one of the chapters in the draft plan and also a supplemental report. Plan Bay Area 2040 was the first time that MTC and NAVAG developed a plan to operationalize the elements of the draft plan. And the action plan in Plan Bay Area 2040 focused on housing, economic development, and resilience, and it yielded the Committee to House the Bay Area, or CASA, which was a group of leaders from public, private, and nonprofit sectors that began convening in 2017 to tackle the housing affordability crisis. In Plan Bay Area 2050, MTC and NAVAG staff wanted to take the spirit of the action plan, but broaden its focus. The implementation plan outlines tangible near-term actions to implement the 35 strategies in the draft plan over the next 5-year horizon. And it focused on the 4 core elements of the plan: the economy, the environment, housing, and transportation. And it will focus on collaboration and engagement with Bay Area residents, local governments, civic organizations, nonprofits, and other stakeholders to identify actions and tackle shared challenges facing the region through 2025 and beyond. The implementation plan will require a shared commitment and strong collaboration among regional policymakers, local governments, partner agencies, and civic organizations. And what we heard from our partners and the public on the implementation plan is here. These are the top 5 themes. There is interest in partnering on advocacy efforts to raise revenues needed to support plan implementation. A lot of interest in collaboration on sea level rise adaptation, requests for more clarity on the roles and responsibilities on this front. There is a need for workforce development, also partnership opportunities in supporting the revamp of the priority conservation planning framework. Organizations were interested in that. And there's a need for metrics and tracking to support accountability with regular progress update on the implementation of the plan. So next slide. These are just a few of the comments that we received. As you can see, the comments support working together, jurisdictions that we are coordinating efforts with for plan implementation. They like that, you know, we're collaborating with them. So one comment here, for example, is the implementation plan must identify actionable steps, timelines, and outcomes for each implementation action to ensure forward movement and transparency. And as I mentioned, you can read all of the comments that we received on our website at planbayarea.org. Next slide. Next, I will touch briefly on the draft EIR. The draft EIR is a requirement that programmatically assesses and discloses any potential environmental impacts of implementing the draft plan. And it also recommends measures to mitigate any significant adverse impacts and analyzes reasonable alternatives. The comments on the draft EIR are handled differently via the California Environmental Quality Act requirements. These will all be part of the final EIR, which will be up for review and adoption in the plan, with the plan in October. But today we just wanted to touch very briefly on the top 5 themes that we heard on the draft EIR, which included you know, folks raised points related to both Plan Bay Area and the draft EIR. Folks questioned assumptions on the regional growth forecast and the implications of COVID-19. There was a lot of interest in hydrology and utilities analyses and the alternatives analysis. And there was also interest in the effects of sea level rise inundation and wildfire risks. Also question MTC's and ABAG's authority to implement the plan and the draft EIR's mitigation measure. As I mentioned, these comments are handled differently according to the requirements of CEQA. So all comments will be responded to and it will be included as part of the final EIR. Next slide. And then here are just some of the comments, sample comments that we received on the draft EIR. Again, the water issue was a top issue here. California doesn't have enough water for even the current state of affairs, much less additional growth. Next slide. So another important element of our Plan Bay Area 2050 engagement process was our youth engagement. From the beginning, there was a lot of effort to engage high school students, college students throughout the Plan Bay Area process. And for this round, we worked with the Spare the Air Youth Program, which is also a program of MTC. And we work with that consultant and Place It, which is an interactive planning firm. We worked with them on a workshop and a video challenge. For the workshop, we held an interactive Zoom-based model building workshop with high school students or students from throughout the Bay Area. Participants learned about the plan and its strategies during the workshop, and they used found objects around their house to build a model of a favorite childhood memory and then also their favorite Plan Bay Area strategy that they had learned about. And they would envision how this strategy would shape their life or the Bay Area in 2050. This workshop kicked off the video challenge that we held this summer, where we asked participants to take their favorite Plan Bay Area 2050 strategy and film themselves telling us about it, and discuss why the strategy that they selected improved their lives, their neighborhoods, and the Bay Area or the environment. The videos were due July 23rd, and we received a total of 19 entries. So for this round, two factors impacted our engagement efforts. It was a digital promotion, which Ursula talked about, and then the pandemic. As we mentioned earlier, digital promotion allowed us to yield greater participation than ever, including attracting a more diverse audience who had previously never participated. And the pandemic actually allowed us to innovate with a digital first approach, which resulted in record numbers of who we saw and read the plan this round, and all throughout the plan's development. I can't remember if Ursula mentioned earlier, but over 5,000 unique visitors downloaded the plan and its materials during the public comment period this summer. So it was a lot of folks reading the plan. Okay, so now I'd like to open it up for questions, and I'll turn it back to Ursula to do our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Leslie. If Adam and Chirag could also turn on your cameras, just in case we have questions. I'm going to go back to the top for the questions that were asked during the last phase of our PowerPoint. Question from Peter. Did you get many comments and questions about the water supply needed to sustain the population growth projected by Plan Bay Area? With the current drought, I'm guessing this is on many people's minds.
So I'm happy to take this question. We did get a number of comments on this topic, many of them in the EIR context. So we're reviewing them through that CEQA lens, recognizing that water is part of the broader draft EIR, and we will be responding to those comments through the final EIR process.
Thank you very much, Dave. Next question from Mike. Will the job projections loss or increase also be revisited?
Well, first, I just want to clarify, we've already revisited the job projections. So because we were developing the regional growth forecast after COVID hit, we were able to incorporate the 2020 job losses that were the result of the pandemic. And actually, we did assume a slow recovery, and what we've seen is actually maybe a faster recovery over the past year than what we anticipated. So as we do our next long-range plan, we will of course look at that topic again to look at the recovery time associated with COVID, with the recession we experienced last year, and then the recovery we're experiencing now, and integrate that into our forecasts.
Thank you very much, Dave. Next question from Jeff. How does the plan address the homelessness problem? Is it anticipated to be solved anytime in the 2050 planning horizon?
I can start on this one and turn it over to Chirag. I'll just note that the housing element of the plan includes a wide variety of strategies kind of clustered under the 3 Ps of protection, preservation, and production. But I'll defer to Chirag to talk a little bit more about the near-term implementation side of that.
Yeah, just to clarify also, I mean, with respect to those strategies, the investments do propose, one of the strategies is a $219 billion investment to build adequate affordable housing, and that includes enough deed-restricted affordable homes necessary to fill the gap for our existing unhoused community. And that's complemented by other strategies that could help support preventing people from falling into homelessness. In terms of the near-term implementation, We recently stood up the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, and we were very fortunate to get a $20 million allocation from the current state budget, and that is going to help us launch a number of pilot projects, one of which includes partnering with the Regional Impact Council, which is a blue ribbon type effort to look at the homelessness issue in the Bay Area, and that will include the development of a regional homelessness prevention system. So those are some near-term actions that we're looking at, and then obviously over a more medium-term or longer horizon, we're very much going to be looking at advocating for the revenues needed to build that necessary supply of affordable housing.
Thank you, Chirag. Next question. How does the plan continue to support the movement of goods, especially construction materials that are needed to support growth?
I'll take this one. Well, first of all, the plan's transportation element includes several strategies related to highways and rail that work to optimize our existing infrastructure for the flow of vehicles and trucks. But longer term, we recognize that we cannot continue expanding capacity on our systems. That additional supply will be quickly consumed by additional demand, and our congestion crisis will continue. And so that's where Plan Bay Area takes a new approach that will help trucks move through our region faster and more reliably. And that's by implementing all-lane tolling on select highways in the region. And by doing this, we can generate revenues to reinvest in our transportation system, while also improving travel times and making those travel times much more reliable going forward. And the reason why this is so important in the goods movement context is because we know that the value of those goods is quite high, and that by providing that reliability, we can help boost our economy and make it easier for folks driving those trucks and for businesses that rely upon them. So that strategy is very important in terms of the long-term strategy for goods movement. The last thing I'll point out is in the economy element of the plan, one of the new strategies is the integration of industrial lands and priority production areas. And these are select areas in our region which are critical for goods movement. They're critical for middle wage jobs. And we've integrated them into the plan for the first time. They can serve as critical hubs for distribution of goods across our region.
Dave, thank you. And the next question from Amalia, can you give a couple examples of draft policies that changed as a result of public input? And before I turn it over, I think to Dave, I just wanted to reiterate again that throughout the process, we engaged the public first. So initially for the guiding principles, we asked the public what was important to them with Bay Area, and we developed our guiding principles based on their input. So mostly based on their input, developed those guiding principles. As well, when we developed strategies when we looked at the plan and when we did some initial modeling, we used public input all throughout the process to develop those strategies, and maybe even more importantly, to hone those strategies. And so we had a lot of various elements. We would send out surveys and polls to ask, how can we better improve these strategies, change these strategies, or add strategies? So I just wanted to point that out first, and I'll turn it over to Dave to maybe discuss some specifics.
Yeah, there are tons of examples of this, but I'll just try to highlight 4 or 5 of them. Transit fare reform, a brand new idea to this iteration of Plan Bay Area, came through the transformative projects process in Horizon, was elevated through project performance and became a strategy through that. As I mentioned, the per mile tolling integrated those discount programs based on public feedback. Our complete streets investments in bike ped, significantly higher than past plans, and that was driven up each cycle. We did public engagement. We added more money to that strategy. Speed limit reductions for safety. We started out looking at those on the freeway network for climate reasons as well as safety. But we then integrated speed limit reductions on local streets as well, primarily for safety reasons, based on feedback and public engagement. In the housing space, we really amped up the amount of investments envisioned for affordable housing over the course of the process based on feedback received. We reinvented the economy element in 2020 based on new economic conditions and also new perspectives that were coming as a result of our engagement process. We added in a park strategy between the draft and final blueprint to reflect that feedback that there's a need for green space near housing. And of course, we heard lots about telecommuting in 2020 and how that fits into our strategy mix. So those are just a few examples, but from the thousands of comments we've got, they really did inform our strategies. I guess the last point I'll make on this is that I talked about a lot of examples from 2018, 19, 2020. We're currently reviewing the feedback we got here in 2021 for the draft plan, and we are considering that feedback, we're responding to that feedback, and we're also going to make revisions in select cases when it's appropriate to our various draft deliverables before the October release of the final plan.
Thank you, Dave. Next question from Christy. Did you visit each high and very high wildfire risk cities before you assigned RENA numbers? CAL FIRE high and very high wildfire maps are not being reported to California until December of 2021. It's been 10 years since these maps have been updated. Correct.
Well, I guess to this question, I'll just say, today's webinar is focused on Plan Bay Area 2050. I would encourage the commenter to participate in the RENA process. There'll be an appeals process for those allocations occurring this fall. And so I would point this individual to that event, those series of events.
On the ABAG website, abag.ca.gov. Thank you. Next plan. Yes, I will share the video link. I just want to apologize. We had technical difficulties. I highly encourage, it's in the chat. It's a YouTube video. If you're unable to link it, I will put it on the Plan Bay Area past events. I'll put the link there so you'll be able to watch. So I encourage you to watch that video. Thank you. Next question from Andrew. Were there any comments on Link 21, also known as the new Trans-Bay Rail Crossing project, from the general public?
I think on this one, I would turn to the public engagement team. Off the top of my head, that was not one of the top themes that rose to the top, but I'm not sure if we received a small number of comments on that.
Yes, I apologize.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say we did receive a handful of comments on Link 21, but we also had received one of the videos from one of our students specifically mentions Link 21. So I just shared the link to the Film Fest. I encourage you to check it out and see what our students, our youth had to say.
Yeah, that's all well said. Thank you. Next question. I don't think we can ignore the water. This is a comment, supply issue when considering housing growth. I did see water conservation mentioned, but the environmental impact report pushed the responsibility onto local environmental impact reports and developers. MTC and ABAG are providing funding for other, namely transportation infrastructure. Probably MTC should consider providing funding for one, water planning, and alternative water supply infrastructure necessary for increasing potable water supply or decreasing demand on those supplies. Are there any plans to do this?
Well, I guess I can touch on the EIR, and then I want to turn it over to Chirag on the implementation aspect of the environment element. I think briefly with regards to the EIR, we touch on water as a key topic in the EIR. We're going to, as I mentioned earlier, Adam and our EIR team will be responding to those comments raised through the CEQA process. Chirag, did you want to add anything with regards to kind of implementation actions related to water?
So one of the key strategies in the plan does have to do with creating more resilient buildings, including on the water side. So we are exploring some potential near-term actions, particularly through one of our in-house services that's housed under the Association of Bay Area Governments, the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, just regarding potential improvements that could be made, as well as just doing mapping of various key initiatives that are already ongoing, whether at the state or regional level.
Thank you, Chirag and Dave. Appreciate it. Next question. Did you get much interest in how people want to spend their free time, such as recreation and cultural activities? This is a question from Bill. I'm going to say initially, and Leslie can finish, that we did. A lot of people are interested in open space and saving that open space free from construction, and so that they have, I think the pandemic really bore this out. We all kind of realized we like the outdoors and we want to spend more time there. So we did receive a lot of comments. Leslie, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, we didn't hear much on cultural activities, but as we mentioned earlier, there was a lot of interest in expanding trails and active transportation infrastructure, so bike ped infrastructure.
Yes.
And we will be exploring how to really weave parks into our planning work even more deeply through some further work on the priority conservation areas starting in 2022. So Plan Bay Area is the first, Plan Bay Area 2050 is our first iteration that really includes a discrete park strategy, trail strategy, protection strategy for our conservation lands as well, which can be parks or agricultural lands. And that PCA update is envisioned to really look at the broad suite of green spaces in our region that we want to protect. And this will help us further identify kind of next steps on implementation there, as well as how we can better weave this even more deeply into a future update of Plan Bay Area.
Thank you very much. Next question, did the advent of autonomous vehicles impact the plan? I will note that I don't recall seeing at this last round a lot of comments, but I do know that in the initial phases. I don't know, Dave and Adam, if you want to address this.
Well, of course, Adam was the author of our autonomous vehicles perspective paper. So I just want to give a shout out to that report from the Horizon Initiative that really kind of laid out some of the different risks and opportunities associated with autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles were baked in from day one in our planning. We looked at different futures with different levels of adoption, from a very conservative approach to a much more, one might say, optimistic approach in terms of AV adoption in Horizon. And then for Plan Bay Area 2050, we did skew a bit more to conservative about the rate of adoption, but we did integrate, a moderate level of AV adoption, especially as we get into the 2030s and 2040s, recognizing that it really is looking like more of a slow adoption rate right now as companies continue to test their products, continue to refine them, but that eventually we will start seeing those as a greater share of the fleet.
Thank you, Dave. Next comes a question from Melanie Bagby from the Cloverdale City Council. Thank you for joining us. How is the transition to movement of freight to trains as a way to remove trucks from our roads for traffic safety and reducing greenhouse gas emissions being addressed in the plan?
Well, first of all, there are some select freight rail improvements included in the plan and goods movement investments. For example, near the Port of Oakland, there's a suite of different improvements included in one of the transportation strategies. I will say, unfortunately, the state law, SB 375, that guides our planning process doesn't give us any credit from shifting trucks to freight rail. In fact, the greenhouse gas target set for the plan is only for cars and light duty trucks. So while we consider what you're discussing an important part of improving our transportation network, it yields no greenhouse gas emission reductions from a Senate Bill 375 perspective. So it can't play a role in our strategies there. The state takes a larger role in the kind of the trucks and freight rail space in terms of that slice of the GHG pie, so to speak.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to move to a question that's also about freight. How do you expect to move goods between the Monterey, Salinas, and Central Valley to the Silicon Valley without high occupancy vehicle lanes between Morgan Hill and Gilroy? How about using all-lane tolling to pay for these HOV lanes? And if not, where is the toll revenue going? How about ensuring that toll revenues are reserved for the corridor generating the revenues, either for operating expenses or capital improvements?
Well, I think that's a fair point, that the revenues that the all-lane tolling strategy would generate should be generally invested into the corridors or into the users of that particular link of the system. And I think that's something we'll explore further as we move into this next generation Bay Area freeways study starting in the winter, which will be an opportunity to take that all-lane tolling strategy and look at it even further, look at alternatives, look at further mitigation actions that could be paired with it, as well as looking at specific corridors and trying to understand which corridors in the broader long-term strategy might be most appropriate for some near to medium term studies or action.
Thank you, Dave. Next question from Tim. While a good deal of the construction will be located in high opportunity communities, this work can be constructed with training, portable benefits, and prevailing wage requirements to provide quality career opportunities for blue collar residents of communities of concern throughout the region. Are you planning to work with the building trades to maximize these opportunities to create middle wage employment for residents of communities of concern? This may be a question for Chirag.
Yes, so I think improving economic mobility is definitely a key theme of the plan, and job training is one of the core strategies in the plan to support that goal. We definitely heard from our labor partners on the need to facilitate access to, quote, high road career opportunities. We also heard from the business community on challenges related to the skills gap and staffing shortages and so forth. So we are definitely interested in working with our labor partners on clarifying some of the near-term steps that we can take to support our mutual goals in this space. And ensuring that that is reflected in the final implementation plan for Plan Bay Area 2050. And I think, we're definitely also interested in, continuing and enhancing our collaboration moving forward with both labor partners and business into the post-adoption period, as well as future plans.
Thank you, Chirag. Next question, and this is a large question, so maybe anyone who has a general answer. Where are the funds for these projects coming from? Property taxes?
Well, for this commenter, I would definitely encourage them to take a look at the Technical Assumptions Supplemental Report, which lays out the broad array of existing revenue sources that exist for transportation, affordable housing, and environmental resilience, where we've documented those existing sources and projected them into the future, but also some of the new revenue sources that we would need to explore for each of these areas. And Plan Bay Area 2050 does assume that a broad suite of new revenue measures would be required. It could come from additional unanticipated monies from the federal or state level, or as we assume in the plan that new regional revenues, new reasonably anticipated regional revenues or local revenues would fill those gaps. And so that might mean things like, sales tax, it might mean property tax, it might mean a parcel tax, depending on the typology of the need. And as we go forward, into 2022, we'll be starting to think about these needs more, and also making sure to continue to advocate on the state and federal level to generate more monies to help, match some of the regional monies that could come to the table. For example, in the sea level rise space, we're considering what's known as a funding and investment strategy for sea level rise that will look at the different types of revenue sources that could help address sea level rise across the region, their pros, their cons, their equity impacts of each, how we can, which ones would most affirmatively advance equity. So we can make some recommendations to the broader community of stakeholders and the public at large about how to best pay for this important need.
Thank you so much, Dave. Next question from Susan. Earlier, Dave mentioned the settlement with the Building Association before finalizing the regional growth forecasts. Did I get this right? And could you please elaborate?
Yes, Susan. So after the original Plan Bay Area in 2013, the Building Industry Association took legal action against MTC and ABAG about the regional growth forecast. And in the settlement agreement with the Building Industry Association, a series of provisions were laid out about how that process would be done going forward, primarily about the transparency of the process, and making sure that the forecast was not continually in flux throughout, but something that before entering the CEQA process was finalized. And so therefore, as part of the final blueprint action in September 2020, we also finalized the regional growth forecast with COVID adjustments. So this is after COVID hit, we integrated those adjustments before entering the EIR process. And so that timing is consistent with the agreement, the settlement agreement established, I believe, in 2014.
Thanks, Dave. Next question from Bruce. What is in the plan to address power grid capacity to support electric vehicles and increase housing?
Well, I think, on this question and maybe a couple others I see further down the list here, Plan Bay Area 2050 is broader than past iterations of Plan Bay Area, but it is by no means as comprehensive as, say, a general plan with 10 or 15 elements. We went from just transportation a decade ago to transportation and housing through previous iterations, and now economy and environment joining us at the table here. We have not identified strategies for that particular sector, but many of the utilities issues are explored as part of the draft EIR, so I would point you to that. And certainly as we go forward for future iterations of Plan Bay Area, it'll be important for us to think about how do we want to continue to enhance existing elements of the plan, and are there any new elements that are important for a regional plan in order to paint that broader picture and that the comprehensive vision for the region.
Yeah, here's, I think, a similar question, Dave, from Susan. ABAG is the right entity to pursue both recycled water plants and desalinization for the Bay Area. Are you or is another entity pursuing either of those? So that may be.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the same sort of answer here, which is, there are water agencies that have a primary responsibility in that area. So I would, disagree with the idea that necessarily ABAG is the right entity to, say, build a desalination plant. But I think what we've done in the water space is, for the first time, integrated water strategies into the plan that are designed to, through our land use actions, but also through retrofits of our existing building stock, reduce the demand for water per capita going forward, recognizing that climate change is going to continue to limit our supply of water. And knowing that our water districts are updating their water management plans now with the higher forecasts associated with this cycle of Plan Bay Area and RENA. And we hope that they'll look very seriously at the issue of water supply as we look at the issue of water demand.
Thank you very much, Dave. Next question from Cliff. Is your definition of affordable housing related to market price or low and very low incomes?
So there is a description of what affordable housing is, I believe, in the draft plan document, but basically it's based on the share of income being spent on housing. So we're looking at, to make sure we're providing housing for those in the lower income demographic and make sure that they're not paying beyond a certain threshold. And this is based on, federal housing definitions of affordability.
Thank you, Dave. Next question from Vida. Does the priority conservation area include adding park letters to provide a bit of relief in urban areas like the Canal neighborhood in San Rafael?
So I can just say, with respect to the current priority conservation area program, it does include designations for urban greening as well as regional recreation. So, parklets, in urban areas could certainly be eligible to be nominated under the current program. I think as we move forward with the revamp of the program, we will definitely be looking at opportunities for projects or that provide multiple benefits that support a broader range of policy concerns that are allowed in the current program, with a particular focus on resilience and equity. So I think all of these considerations will be will be on the table as we work with a broad range of partners and stakeholders, and including local jurisdictions and elected officials in the revamp of this program over 2022 and into 2023.
Thank you so much, Chirag. Next question from our partner, Lisa at the Air District. Seamless Bay Area seems to have good recommendations for how to better connect transit and expand transit in the Bay Area. Will MTC be advancing some of the strategies recommended in the Seamless Bay Area report? And I will just say that we just engaged in a blue ribbon effort where we had elected officials, advocates, and our partners try to tackle some of the issues related to COVID and the reduction of ridership for Bay Area transit agencies, for the 27 Bay Area transit agencies. They came up with a list of recommendations that will be finalized into an action plan that MTC will be considering in the next month or two. So to answer your question, that part of it, Lisa, yes, we have taken the opportunity with the funding that has come to the Bay Area and started the blue ribbon, and then move forward to tackling some of the transit challenges, and have a list of recommendations that we will be executing hopefully in the next month or so. So I'll turn it over to Dave or others to talk about the plan and anything related to Seamless.
Well, thanks for that context, Ursula. I think I'd like to just add on this a little bit on the strategies, and then turn it over to Chirag on the implementation side of that, and the transition from draft to final implementation plan. I think on the strategies, the great news is we've incorporated 2 specific strategies related to a more seamless transit network. So strategy T3 and strategy T4. And these strategies really relate to both the fare integration. So on the fare side, it's more seamless. It also times transfer hubs in the region, so you have a more seamless journey from end to end. And the plan envisions a set of, I believe, around 15 or so of these times transfer hubs across the Bay Area that make the journey much more seamless. Places like Millbrae Caltrain Station, where currently those transfers are not as seamless as they could be. I don't know, Chirag, if you wanted to add a little bit more about how we're connecting the dots between the blue ribbon and the implementation plan for these 2 strategies.
Yeah, certainly. So the transformation action plan recommended by the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force included a broad range of recommendations in fare integration policy, mapping and wayfinding, bus transit priority, connected network planning, and a whole host of areas. What we are doing for the final implementation plan is really mapping those recommendations and nesting them under the appropriate strategies that are already identified in the plan. So, we will be moving forward with having a lot of alignment and consistency between the final Blue Ribbon Task Force recommendations and our final implementation plan that will be put forward for consideration over the coming months.
Thank you both. Next question. And I'm going to provide an initial response, and I'm going to turn it over to Leslie. From Bobby, in engaging participation was there outreach in Spanish and Cantonese? The answer is yes. Throughout the process, we do engage in Spanish and Cantonese and Mandarin. And I'll turn it over to Leslie, who will manages our translations in this effort. So she can go into specifics, Leslie.
Yeah, for this latest round of engagement, we did do, as I mentioned earlier, a campaign, a digital engagement campaign in Spanish, Cantonese, and Mandarin that targeted those specific communities. And then we always translate materials upon request. We translate materials into Spanish and written Chinese traditional characters. Those are posted to our websites. And yeah, in previous rounds of engagement, we've done specific engagement in language to those communities as well.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Roland is asking, are we looking at rolling freeways for freight? And if not, why not?
I'm not entirely sure what Roland is referring to here. Maybe it's perhaps related to a single comment letter. It sounds like maybe some sort of concept of having the freeway move alongside the truck. If so, that's not a investment or strategy in Plan Bay Area 2050.
Thank you so much, Dave. And this is our final Q&A question. Oh, we have more, okay. Vita asks, are there any recent federal findings that can help, and I think she might mean funding, that can help fund the projects listed in the plan, Dave, or anyone, or Chirag?
Yeah, I would just say that we are keeping a very close track of developments at the federal and state level. I think with respect to at the federal level, that there was the approved American Rescue Plan, which did provide a significant infusion of funding at the regional level. That funding has also been filtering through at the state level, and we'll be able to support some key transportation programs and priorities at the state level, for those state level programs. And then, with the recently approved bipartisan infrastructure bill that was approved by the Senate, still to be approved by the House, that contains potentially very significant funding support, especially for transportation and some climate provisions. Beyond that, there is, the budget resolution, the reconciliation bill that is being discussed, and that is expected to have more potential support for housing and climate and resilience as well. With all of which is to say, it is an extremely unusual and dynamic environment at the federal and state level, and we really look forward to seeing continued progress that's going to help us support these planned priorities.
Thank you so much, Chirag. And as a response, Dave Roland says a rolling freeway is a freight train that carries lorries that get on and off the train like a channel tunnel. I learned something today. Thank you, Roland. Okay, next comment and question from Christy. Please keep bus routes in smaller towns and cities as housing is added. Our bus routes were reduced from 4 to 1/2 route. The 1/2 route allows students to get home from high school only. Middle school and elementaries were eliminated. How will new unit residents get to their jobs if they don't have a car or Samtrans? I will say, working with through our promotion efforts, our All Aboard Bay Area, Promote the Transit Bay Area promotion efforts, I do know that in the next, between now and the next few months, transit operators will be returning service where they've had to eliminate or reduce as ridership is increasing. The last week, I know BART saw an increase, especially on Fridays and weekends. So I know that they returned their service on August 2nd. So I do think, Christy, that transit service will improve as time goes on, as school is back in session. I don't know, Dave, Chirag, anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess what I would add to that is with Plan Bay Area 2050, strategy T1 envisions a full restoration of our region's transit service, in addition to new investments that are planned under strategies T10, 11, and 12, which are really deep investments in local, regional transit, rail transit services, as well as express bus services. So there are, $100+ billion of investment in this plan and expanding our transit system, and further investments in terms of restoring it to its pre-COVID service levels. So we do, identify the need for all of our growth geographies to at least have a basic level of transit service. And this plan includes the funding necessary to get to that level of service in places across the region. But I want to make one last point, which is it is also important to make sure we have housing close to jobs. And so not everyone will take transit, and that's okay. We can have some folks taking other modes of transportation as well to get from point A to point B. And if that is the case, getting people to live closer to where they work even if they're continuing to drive, and especially if they're driving an electric vehicle that does not produce the sorts of greenhouse gas emissions from the tailpipe, can be an important strategy as well for a wide variety of reasons. So it's just important to consider it's a combination of both all of these investments in alternative modes, the land use pattern in the plan, and the strategies that drive that to encourage more housing close to job centers, and those climate investments as well.
Dave, thank you. That's all we have in the Q&A. I see Tim with his hand raised. Tim, I think you typed something in the box, but if you do want to ask a question verbally, you can hit *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, Tim. Mark, how about you? *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, how about this? Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted, Mark. Go ahead.
All right, great. So, okay, let's see. Starting with versus rails and express bus service. I have a design for a group rapid transit, which was actually designed and tested prior to 2000, and a quarter scale working model was built. So group rapid transit operating above streetlights, and above that would be a stack. Above that would be bicycles, fast and slow. Then above that would be pedestrians and miscellaneous mobility devices. And above that would be the solar canopy that powers it all. All of this would be new technology. Actually, the captive column structural geometry was invented in the 60s, and I worked with the inventor for 10 years. And the materials that are available can make that a low-cost, lightweight, factory fabricated and installed by crane network. And Seamless Bay Area has a map of a grid, and I would actually make that grid finer, so people should be able to get to one of these things within 3/4 of a mile, and it'll be extremely attractive, because imagine riding past over the stoplights without having to stop on your bicycle. And you could get across San Francisco in 15 minutes or less, from corner to corner, as an example, if you're going pretty fast on a diagonal elevated structure. So you don't have to stop for signals. You get to see the view. And it pulls people. It's going to pull people right out of their cars. So you're going to eliminate the congestion from commuters by getting people up into one of their modes of choice up there, whether it's active or whether it's in the group rapid transit system. That's one piece. On housing, there is new technology for housing. I'm working with two people who are each designing a kind of manufactured housing, one of which uses ultra high performance concrete, and the other uses core sandwich construction. And they're looking at designs that can both enable far less expensive housing than now, when we're looking at shortages, so the construction material costs are multiplying. The share for, so water, share for housing and commercial, monocrop agriculture that Earl Butz said, get bigger, get out, back in the 50s. We need to get to intensive multi-cropping mulching that saves 80% of the water in agriculture, which is where most of the water is going. So that's a point there. Now, when we switch from fossil fuels, and I'm in a battery and solar technology company, and we expect that by 2030 we can do it. That should save about 30% of the cost of living, according to stats I've seen. 10%. 25 to 30%, because 10% of the cost of living in the United States is energy, 15% is transportation, and in the rest of the world, energy is 15%. So that's where I get those numbers.
Mark, can I interrupt you a second?
Yeah.
So we are stopping at 11, and I do have a couple more slides. What I would recommend is if you could send your comments, and I see a few more hands up, and I apologize. We have had a lot of comments today. If you could send your comments to info@planbayarea.org, we will respond to your comments. all of your comments. I do appreciate it. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mark, but
Okay. And I would
just
like
wanna
to actually
respect
talk with
everyone's
you guys
time.
about that.
yeah, okay. I want to respect everyone's time because we have a few more slides. So thank you so much for your comment. And for those who have their hands up, I'm sorry, but if you could, info@planbayarea.org. Thank you. Okay, Jules, if we could go to the next slide. Very good. Okay, so I just want to wrap this up. So with upcoming events, so we're going to have a webinar that outlines the implementation plan partnerships, the plan's equity component, and a final step to plan adoption on September 9th. So next is the implementation plan update at the September joint MTC Planning Committee with the ABAG Administrative Committee meeting on September 10th. We're going to have a regional advisory working group meeting outlining the final Plan Bay Area 2050 on October 5th. And then later that month, we are going to submit the final Plan Bay Area 2050 and the final environmental impact report for consideration for adoption by ABAG and MTC. So those are the upcoming meetings. And I want to thank you all for joining us. Almost 4 years of engagement. It's been my pleasure and honor to work with you, all of my colleagues, all of the public, all of our partners and stakeholders. It's been a true pleasure and honor. And I want to thank you so much. So with that, please have a good day, and we hope to see you at one of these upcoming events. Thank you so much.